Start a recording again. Perfect. Screen share. Screen share. So we had a few people who had different ones, or they looked quite a bit different. Excuse me. So if you don't know what you're doing, you could hurt yourself or somebody else. You could also start a fire. That's what this paragraph essentially says. That's why it's important to learn this stuff. Because I definitely, oh, Nate, you're asking about a quiz. So the quiz, I think because you were in the other room this morning, you missed it. We're not going to do a quiz in my section. Your first quiz is going to be this afternoon, and it's going to be on the modules you go over with Clint.
Okay.
Some technological indifferences this morning, and so I wasn't able to get it all sorted out properly.
Cool.
Which is good for you guys, I think. I mean, I had 100 questions I was going to give you. No, I wasn't able to get the recordings up in time. I wasn't able to get it all working properly, so I just sort of scrapped it for this morning. Those quizzes will start coming up with every ILM. It's just right now we're trying to make sure everyone can even log into everything. So.
Good, cool.
So when I'm on the My Class, where would these videos be?
Well, they're nowhere yet.
I just never used this, so I was curious.
Gotcha. So let me show you a little bit of what it might look like here.
I just been trying to figure it out, and I get it, but I don't.
A lot of this right now, these first few days, it might seem like things are a bit slow. It's because of we're trying to get everybody on the same page, right? So
yeah.
So what are you able to get into your Brightspace? Like log into it?
The My Class or the Brightspace?
My class. That's what it's.
Yeah. Sorry, I just seen something today that said Brightspace or something.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Hey, Andrew, I was going to go over all of this afternoon again.
You are? Oh, okay, good.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so
everybody's going to have to be in there to do my quiz this afternoon. So
that's what my thought was too, making sure everyone can log in for it. So, okay, Clint will go over that a bit too. If you do have any troubles, like you could log in previously, but now you couldn't. I was on the phone with IT this morning and I had to reset my password. It wouldn't let me log in from my computer. So if that might be an issue, you'll have to get a hold of IT. But thanks, Clint. Clint will take a look at that for everybody this afternoon. Or talk about that a bit. Okay, so what do you see on your screen? Can you still see my hazardous materials and fire protection?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going then. So we need to know the roles, responsibilities, features, and practices related to the WHIMIS program. The 3 key elements of WHIMIS. We're going to need to describe handling, storing, and transporting hazardous materials, safe venting procedures, and fire hazard classes and procedures. So those are the 5 things we're going to talk about. Has anybody not done WHIMIS ever in their career? That was the answer I was expecting to get. Everybody should have done with WHIMIS at your workplace. Essentially, at every workplace you go to, one of the first few things you're going to do when you start there is their WHIMIS training. It's pretty standard across the board. So who's regulated under WHIMIS? Suppliers and users are both regulated. So the people who make this stuff, suppliers, distributors, and the people who use it were also the ones who are going to be regulated. The path of information. So our suppliers or the manufacturers are supposed to make labels and MDSs that contain all the pertinent information. Our employer is going to get all that information and then they have to ensure we're taking the proper training. Remember, it's our employer's responsibility to make sure they're providing proper training, which then means once we have been properly trained, our responsibility is to use that training to the best of our ability. Okay. So a supplier, these are, like I said, they're the manufacturers, distributors, and importers of the controlled products. As a condition of their sale, they have to classify them, label them properly, and give you the MDSs, which is what I still believe the new ones are called, material data sheets. Each one of those data sheets is going to tell you how to use the product safely, what to expect if recommendations are not followed, hazards. This is an important one. What to do if accidents occur, how to recognize symptoms of overexposure, and what to do if you are overexposed. Okay, so these three ones are very, very important. Definitely not a time to go find out what to do in case of emergency, or at least have any idea, is when something's happening. Okay. So supplier labels, label with a hat border, contain the following information. They need to be attached to the container. So these product identifiers, supplier identifiers, these are a lot more to do with bureaucracy, and sometimes if you call a poison control center, they're going to ask you for a product identifier, which will be on the can. This will give them information so they know what's in it, okay, the active ingredients. Hazard symbols, these are going to be what you're going to be looking for a lot, okay? Is this thing flammable? Well, you're probably going to look for the hazard symbol if it's flammable. It's quite often the visual indication of how safe something is for us. A statement that an MSDS is available, risk phrase describing the physical and health hazards associated, precautionary statements, and first aid measures. So basic first aid will be on the can. For instance, like I'd say, if ingested, do not induce vomiting, call poison control, for instance, is what commonly they'd have a statement like that on these. So they do have to provide the separate MSDS for each controlled product that they supply. We have to provide workplace labels. This is like what I was talking about yesterday under housekeeping. You need to know what's in containers. Having all those mystery jugs underneath the bench is very hazardous. You have no idea what's in them, how flammable they are, how reactive they are. In some instances, you could have two components beside each other where if they accidentally mix, you could have a very, very explosive reaction, for instance. Does anyone out there deal with really hazardous material? Hauling hazardous things. Hot sulfur or anything like that, bitumen, nothing.
Our truck drivers do, and it's just, you know, because we haul pretty much anything, but as long as they have their placards and everything, they always have to have, there's always all these, I want to say contracts, but it's not called a contract.
One of the things that's interesting about the reason I bring this up is because, so if your haulers are hauling anything, it's a bit different than WHIMIS because those aren't chemicals that you're bringing into your facility to use. They're just being transported. So it does fall under the transportation guidelines, but there is still information out there. For any of you who worked in oil field or anything, there's some very caustic powders that you can get out there, get on your skin, and you try and wash it away with water, it will cause a very severe chemical burn. And so you need to be trained on how to properly deal with these kinds of spills and stuff like that. Employer's responsibility. Every container of a controlled product has a proper label, either a supplier label or workplace label. It can be either one. The MDSs are readily available. You're trained, so it's their responsibility to make sure you're all trained and understand hazards. They also need to make sure your training has how to read the labels, how to read workplace labels, and how to read MDSs. Now, this is just what information is on here and where do I look for it, okay? Safe handling, use, and store controlled products. Safely dispose of the controlled products. So this is a common one nowadays too. You can get in quite a lot of trouble for pouring, for instance, if you're doing air conditioning, just letting the refrigerant out into the atmosphere is not a good, proper way to dispose of a controlled product. How to respond to a spill or a leak, and different color coding. So this is the last one, dependent on your work site. You know, if there are different colors of pipes around the building and they denote different chemicals inside, those will all have to be in that training as well. Irresponsibility, very typical to other ones, is to participate, to use that information to protect yourself and others. Then you also need to make sure you're using the workplace labels where and when required. And if something isn't labeled, you need to report it. So what's on a workplace label? It's required whenever you take a controlled product and transfer it from its original container to a workplace container. So for instance, I take brake clean out of a barrel, out of a bulk barrel, and I put it in a spray bottle. That spray bottle needs to have a workplace label on it. And it's going to be in a specific format. So it needs a tag, label, or sticker that shows the required information. So that's the formatting. What does it have to have on there? It has to have the product identifier, so the chemical or generic name. Same as the material safety data sheet. So brake clean is the generic name. That's what people know what brake clean is. And they know what the chemical compound is for it. Or the people who do matter, like for instance, that poison control centers or in emergency rooms, they'd be able to look this kind of information up based on that name. And then they'd be able to find out any of the information they need. The reference to an MSDS, so just like the supplier label, it needs to say that there is an MSDS and that the information is available there. And safe handling information, precautions necessary to avoid exposure when handling. So for instance, on a spray bottle of brake clean, you're going to need to have that. This is brake clean. There is an MSDS. It is poisonous, toxic, flammable. That's what you would want on this label. So the WHIMIS classifications. Unfortunately, this is what has changed. And if you look in your book, it should be identical to what's in this book here.
The last couple pages were different.
The last couple are different still.
Yeah, I thought I lost it, but page 4 is a lot different too.
Page 4 was a lot different.
Yeah. I have the version 21 or 22 for this one.
Huh.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that right now. Like I've been looking at them side by side and they're
Unless mine's different.
page 4. Okay, page 4 is quite a bit different. Yeah.
Yeah, and the last one too then, I think.
Talks about the supplier labels a bit different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me switch over to this one here for you. That's what I'm going to do then. Can you see this one now? It says instructor copy. That's what you can see? Perfect. So almost everything, a lot of these things were the same. Here's what the difference was. Provide an MSDS, so they're still calling it MSDSs here. The MSDS is going to tell you how to use the product safely, what recommendations. Yeah, this was all the same. Supplier labels. So here's something different in the supplier labels. It's going to have risk phase phrases.
Mine's different too from this one.
Yeah.
Ours says SDS.
Ooh, what
And
is yours?
22.
22. So you have a brand new version, and that is up to date. Because I have version 21.
Yeah, so I have the same one as him then.
You have, are these pictures here different?
Yeah.
Ours goes to like its own pages pretty much.
Yeah. It shows every hazard and explains it all.
Yeah. It's like 4 pages worth.
Yeah. And then on page 4, it's like a quarter of the page of writing.
Okay. So you still have hazards where it goes into all the different hazards and stuff like what I'm showing right now, right? Like here's oxidizing. And then,
No, we don't have that.
no.
I sent a photo of what it looks like.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I thought my book was brand new. I just got mine in March.
I just got this one yesterday from the
This is
government.
version 21.
Yeah, I have version 21 as well. So everybody go down all the way past all this WHIMIS stuff.
The data sheets.
all the way past that.
Okay.
Go down to where I am right here. Objective 3. Actually, not even that one. We'll go. Does your objective 3 look like mine here?
Yeah, is the picture paint cans.
Okay, so for right now, here's what I'm going to do. Because at the time where I was teaching the old version and everyone had a similar book, it wasn't too bad. But now that we have all these different books, I need to find that section, version 22. So we're going to skip over WHIMIS for right at this moment. Until I get the right book, because I'd rather do the correct one. And if they've updated it now, then that's good. So my apologies, let's keep on going and get through some of this other stuff. If anything changes with these ones, this section should all be the same, and from here on it should be the same. There wasn't any major differences in how this section was. So, but if there is, please let me know again so I can make sure that I don't tell you anything that isn't gonna help you. All right, so I'm gonna cruise all the way past that and down to here. Handling and storage. Describe handling, storing, and transportation procedures when dealing with hazardous materials. So just like in this picture, this is a very good practice to have. You're gonna have a place where you put paint, a place where you put aerosols. Most of you have a place where you recycle containers like this, or a special place to put your flammable materials, things like that.
Like the cabinet for the full stuff, or when it's empty?
Yep, cabinets, or even a special disposal when it's empty. Or are you just tossing it in the garbage?
Garbage.
It's in the garbage. That's up here in this area. This is pretty common for it. And when you get to larger centers, they're going to have separate bins for paint, cans, separate bins, or a separate bin for aerosols. You'll have a place where even shock absorbers get recycled separately. Anything that had flammable liquid in it gets recycled in a separate bin. So
The only thing we recycle is those our oil and everything, like the empty pills.
Plastic jugs.
Someone comes in and takes them.
gotcha. Yep, very common. That's pretty common. Bulk fuels generally have a ground cable on them, even bulk tankers, so you avoid static discharge. Static can be very, very bad for igniting fuel vapors. Pretty common concern out there. If any of you have ever worked with fuel and stuff, you'll know, like, at the racks when they're fueling up, they have to have a ground cable attached. They typically can't have their vehicles running. They're really worried about sparks, things like that. You can't disconnect and reconnect anything. You can't, if your vehicle dies, for instance, on the rack, like, you can't get it started, you can't boost there. You have to get it hauled off before you can boost it, things like that, okay?
I used to be a vac hauler for many years, and we had to always, it was a big thing to ground constantly.
On a vacuum truck, it's even, it's very, very crucial on a vacuum truck that when you're sucking up whatever it is you're vacuuming is moving so quickly down that hose.
Static, everything's static.
Oh yeah. I used to have I would vacuum out my fireplace when, like, just the ashes when they're all cooled off. I'd vacuum them out of the fireplace into my shop vac, and the static, you could see it. It was like a spark plug. It would jump almost an inch gap from the fireplace to the hose of the vacuum as you're sucking all that really, really dry, fine ash in.
So are you reading off of the version 22 right now?
Nope, this is the older version. Is it completely different?
Yeah, I'm wondering, yeah, because I went through this whole book and I didn't find any safe handling of anything in here. And I have 21.
This is version, can you see this right now here where it says instructor copy on the top?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is version 21. And this,
Yeah, I don't have that in my book at all.
this isn't in your book?
Or, Jesus Christ.
27?
It is. I'm reading in the wrong book. Wow, my bad. Sorry.
Okay, good. I was concerned. I'm like, oh man, we've got a lot of different versions of the book out there and they're really different. So, Okay, because I think the only major change was that WHIMIS section. And like I had looked at it, and this 21 is the same as the version I had, so I didn't think that any of you had the new version, to be honest. That's why we're in this pickle a little bit. But yeah, these sections are almost identical. So we want to reduce the amount of flammable liquid that we're keeping at any place, and if we do have to have it, we're storing it in proper containers, and we're using proper procedures to fill. So the Underwriters Laboratory of Canada, ULC, or Canadian Standards Association, those are the standards that our fuel containers are going to have. It's hard to see on this one, but it's in the plastic right there, stamped into it. There would be your standards. Standard sign. So those are the only approved containers for fuel.
So don't be the lady fueling up plastic bags at a gas station.
Oh my good gosh, no, that's bad. Most gas stations shouldn't even let you, like,
Put it in the trunk of her car.
Yep.
let a container like that. So is what happens. So you're supposed to use only those at the fuel station too. So red for gasoline, and typically diesel is yellow. Okay. Now, if that yellow container has gasoline written on it, I probably wouldn't trust it. Just, I don't know. Some places I've seen do silly things like that. They didn't have a red jerry can. They needed some gas for a generator. They grabbed a yellow one. Whatever, it is an approved container. It's just be aware that just because it's yellow doesn't necessarily mean that diesel is the only one that can go into it.
We switch them at home just in case anyone steals it.
Ah, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
So Alberta OH&S and the Fire Safety Code define the standards for storing fuel in portable containers. So no glass or unapproved plastic. They need to be in approved closed containers inside an approved flammable liquid storage cabinet. This has become really popular nowadays. Lots of the OH&S inspectors are looking around for flammable storage cabinets. If it is vented, it needs to be vented to the outdoors, sealed with materials equivalent to the material used to construct the cabinet, or stored in a cabinet outside. Not next to exit stairways, elevators, or routes that give access to exits. Can you imagine why not? Why wouldn't you want to store any of this stuff near an exit?
Want that to cause a fire right by where you're trying to escape.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a good idea, does it now? Yeah.
It affects your ERP.
They didn't say anything to us because ours is like at least 5 feet away from our door.
Oh yeah? Then
Yeah.
yes. I guess what they're saying, it's not next to it. 5 feet is far enough. Yeah. And even in this one here, does anyone who has version 22, does it give them a number or anything? Or does it look just like this?
It looks like that.
Okay, perfect. So OH&S and Transportation of Dangerous Good Act regulate how you transport and handle flammable liquids, compressed gas. OH&S and the safety code require that they be used, stored, and transporting according to manufacturer's specs. These things can be very dangerous. We need to store them properly. And even when you're on a cart, they should be chained in there as well. So, does anybody recall high school chemistry and you've seen a sheet like this? This is essentially a table. They call it incompatible materials. This table, it shows things that react together. So an acid or a base plus one of these react so volatilely that they will create fire. Okay. I'm hoping not many of you need to worry about this on a daily basis. The bottom line is if you don't know, you shouldn't be mixing chemicals, okay?
So I got a question then.
All right.
Let's see. So here where it says where the A is. Let's say alcohol, and then plus you mix with B, reacts to equals explosion. Does that mean as soon as you mix them together, they'd explode?
So which section are you talking about here? So alcohol is this one here, alcohol.
Yeah.
Alcohol.
Or alcohol plus acids or bases, reactive metals.
Mm-hmm.
If
Sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it's not so immediate.
mm-hmm.
It can take a little bit of time. Now, will all alcohols and all acids equal an explosion? Yes, but it depends on the degree.
Mm-hmm.
Weak acid, probably with a very short chain alcohol, would have a smaller reaction. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A long chain alcohol with a strong acid will have a much stronger reaction.
Okay.
Is there, I'm guessing, is there something that you mix on a regular basis that you're wondering about?
No, this is just a curious question that I had.
Gotcha. It's all these are chemical reactions. So alcohols react with acids. When
Mm-hmm.
action happens, it's either absorb energy or release energy. An explosion
Yeah.
reaction that releases energy. So it's breaking down the chains of molecules inside of here, and that's how it's releasing energy.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these things react quite in very interesting ways too. And even sometimes metals can react with other metals. If anyone ever works with any kind of mercury, mercury is very detrimental to aluminum. Very, very, very detrimental to aluminum. It breaks it down really, really fast. So yeah, there is lots of things. It depends on the chemicals work. If you're in the oil field industry, you might be working with some of these nitrates and perchlorates, okay? And they can react to things very, very quickly. It just depends. If you're working in an industry that has that, you'll know about it. You'll be trained about these kinds of things, or you should be in. Safe venting procedures. So the OHS code describes the safe requirements for ventilation. Why are we venting? Because we're trying to get rid of fumes and gases. So remember I said welders make a lot of fumes and gases, and then there's this dust that is around. That's what we're trying to get rid of. So a very basic ventilation system is going to take fresh air in, move the fumes and vapors, and exhaust them out. And we're going to try, and there is the OH&S standards will have, based on the volume of the shop, you're going to have a certain amount of efficiency. So you need to recycle or replace a certain amount of that air in a certain amount of time. And that's the efficiency of your ventilation system. You can have local ventilation, so it's sucking directly off of your workbench. Limited in the fact that only the place where the hose goes to. It misses some, so fumes can pile around as well. Recommend that you wear respirator as well, or some type of respiration protection, because you're still going to get some of the fumes in this as well. So portable smoke machine, what this one's doing, it's sucking out the exact, locally is the exact same as the other one, but instead of venting to the outside, it's recycling the air. So mines use technology similar to this so that they can release the exhaust, vehicle exhaust directly into the mine, but you're gonna have filters, scrubbers, cleaners to get the fumes and chemicals out of the exhaust, and then it releases out of the air, and it's going to release just the air back into the shop. So working in a confined space, if you work in a confined space, you need to be specially trained. That's my caveat for that. It's called confined space entry, and you can't go in there unless you have it. These don't just get used in a confined space. So these portable gas detectors you're using to find leaks on tanks before you begin working on them. And to monitor the air continuously inside of the shop in case something does decide to leak, okay?
We used to use them to check the trailers and trucks before we did services on them. Because if you go in the pit, you could accidentally fall down or get knocked down if there was a little bit of sour going on. So we would check the trucks all before we serviced them.
Yep, that too, absolutely. We would use these to make sure that a unit was steamed. So they come back, they're certified that they're steam cleaned. Well, you would check around all of the hose fittings and pipe connections and this kind of stuff in some of the pipes too, to make sure that it's steamed out. All right, fire hazards. Here's the one that I'm very, very concerned about. OH&S safety and OH&S, so Occupational Health and Safety Code, includes the following prohibitions for general protection of workers and prevention of fires. So there's a whole bunch of restrictions when it comes to flammable environments. And then also, if you worked in a mine, you're going to have even more regulations about flammable environments. A lot of these, so a person must not enter or work in a work area if more than 20% of the lower explosive limit of a flammable or explosive substance is present in the atmosphere. Chances are you're not going to be working in an environment that has anywhere close to that, okay? This is all about starting to get in the shop so much of an atmosphere where you could have an explosion risk, and then you would start having to use spark-proof or sealed electronic components and things like this. So important for us are things like this one. Soaked rags, you need to have a special bin for contaminated rags. That's a fire hazard. Mixing, cleaning, and using flammable or combustible liquids for something they're not supposed to be used for is very dangerous. So for instance, using diesel fuel to wash things off is a big no-no. Diesel fuel is a fuel and not a cleaner, okay? How do we get fire? Heat, fuel, and oxygen is what they call the fire triangle. Fuels are anything that due to their chemistry can be altered through a chemical reaction such as burning. That will produce carbon dioxide and water. So most fuels, whether solid, liquid, or gas, are mostly carbon and hydrogen. That's what most fuel is made of. I mean, any of the diesel, gasoline, butane, ethylene, ethanol, any of these are carbon hydrogen chains put together. And when you break apart those carbon and hydrogen chains, that's how you get the energy released. Air, so air is what we talk about that we breathe, but the air needs to have a sufficient concentration of oxygen. So it's really the oxygen that is feeding the fire, not just air. I talk about this a few times later on throughout the course too, but what is mostly what we breathe in? What is in the air?
Carbon?
No, not carbon.
Nitrogen.
Nitrogen, yeah. To a Chrysler vehicle, and you fill your tires with nitrogen because it's good for fuel economy, right? So the average air is probably about 79% nitrogen, as it is. That's just how it is. So most of it is nitrogen anyhow. Yeah, just to keep in mind. Ignition, so then sufficient heat must be present for the fire to start and maintain. Different classes of fire. This should all remain the same. The fire classifications and type of fire extinguishers haven't changed. So class A, wood and paper, B, flammable liquids, C, electrical components, D, combustible metals, and K, combustible cooking media. I'm having some people who are having trouble with the audio. I'm gonna try and mute everybody again, just in case. Okay, I muted everybody. So hopefully that will work. Let me know if that works for you, if you can hear a bit better now. Class B, flammable liquids, C. Oh, I said all these ones. So for some of us, we probably won't be dealing with Class K, a Class K fire extinguisher, combustible cooking media. So this is going to be the kind of, if you end up getting a job at McDonald's or something like that, Class K fire extinguisher is going to be what's there. When I was younger at the restaurants I worked at, it was a foam fire extinguisher that was above the entire area of the kitchen. And so if you pulled that fire alarm, what would happen is it essentially would fill the whole kitchen with foam. Not something that easily is cleaned up, but it definitely would put a fire out very, very quickly. Combustible metals, chances are you're not dealing with those either. Depending on where you work, you might be, but combustible metals is a very specialty thing too. Now, Class C, you might not necessarily be dealing with anything that's Class C, an electrical equipment fire. I bet most of the fires happen because of flammable liquids and wood and paper, or plastic, garbage, things like that. Almost all fire extinguishers are good for Class A, B, and C nowadays. The reason for that is because in a panic is not the time you want to be making sure that your fire extinguisher is going to be fit for the kind of fire you want to put out. And considering that Class A, B, and having C as a cause of fire, an electrical fire, are probably the most common. That's why most fire extinguishers are those three classes. So an A class fire extinguisher will have a green triangle with an A, good for wood, paper, cloth, rubber, packing materials, all different kinds of plastics. All right. They can usually be extinguished by the cooling effects of water or water solutions. So there used to be, when I was going to elementary school, we used to have big red jugs that had a green A on them or an A on them. And all it was a red jug with a pump on it, and it was full of water. So those were good to put out, paper fires, stuff like that. You have to manually pump it, make sure they're full of water, and it's just going to pump the water onto it. So a Class B, flammable gases. So acetylene, propane, natural gas, flammable liquids, gasoline or diesel. This is what we class as a Class B fire. They're best extinguished by smothering. So if anybody, if you've ever started a grease on fire on your stove or a pot of grease on fire, you don't want to pour water into it because that just sends the flaming grease everywhere. You'd want to put the lid on the pot, and that would smother the fire, which is basically replacing any oxygen that is in there with the fumes and the vapors. Now it doesn't have any oxygen, it can't react. For a fire extinguisher, they probably have a dry chemical or a foam inside of there that will displace the oxygen. And electrical fire. So the big thing about electrical fires, because an electrical fire could also be a Class A or Class B fuel, the only difference between those is Class C fire extinguisher won't conduct electricity. Okay, that is the main difference. D fire extinguisher is most of the time going to be very specialized, so it's not going to be an A, B, C, D fire extinguisher. You would have a D fire extinguisher specifically for metals. It's a very special kind of fire. I mean, lots of you have probably lit magnesium on fire and see what that does. That would be a metal fire, obviously. And combustible oil or grease. So this is cooking oil or grease is what they are talking about though. For us, oil and grease, we would talk of it as a flammable liquid, okay? Oil and grease would be classified in this one, flammable liquids and gases. I'd be willing to bet that none of you have a Class K fire extinguisher at your job sites, okay, for cooking oils or grease. And now we just have some of the different types of fire extinguishers that you use. Now, am I gonna go thinking about this, hey, this fire extinguisher has foam in it, I don't want to use it on this. No, I'm just gonna look at these, okay? Chances are this multi-purpose dry chemical is going to be the fire extinguisher that are hanging all over the place on buildings, okay? And ABC. These are the most common types of fires. Always going to have a label on it, needs to be a label. It's going to be an expiry date as well. There'll be a tag here, says if the fire extinguisher has been inspected, when it was inspected, and it'll also have a gauge on it. So how to extinguish a small fire? Your degree of success. So if you are going to be successful putting out a fire, a few things reflect on that. Knowledge of the emergency process, the location and condition of the fire extinguisher, whether the correct extinguisher is available, size of the fire when it's discovered, whether the person who finds the fire is trained to use it, and how quickly the alarm is sounded, and the fire department is notified. So I would say if you have a fire, you should let people know before you try and put out with an extinguisher. Unless it's something really, really small and you're certain you're going to put it out. Other than that, you have no idea and how fires can get out of control very, 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 very quickly, very fast. Something can happen. And just like anything, I'll say it over and over again, things can happen so quickly and you definitely don't want to have a fire happening. If you do need to use a fire extinguisher, remember, think, and don't panic. Slow down, okay? Let people know what's going on. Call for help, okay? Don't be afraid to call the fire department. They would much rather come and put a nothing fire out and make sure it's out than come and try and deal with a huge out of control fire. Absolutely. Do not use the wrong type of fire extinguisher. So if you don't have the right kind of fire extinguisher, don't do it. Don't use it. You have a great potential of making it worse, even though you're using a fire extinguisher, okay? If you do have,
especially on a Class C or D fire.
yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, if you use the Class A fire extinguisher on a Class C fire, not only could you have an electrical fire now, you could have someone who has electrical shock, okay? If you use a Class A fire extinguisher on a Class B fire, you could be spraying fire, physically spreading it. Like if you don't have the right one or you're not sure, don't do anything because you could just make it worse, okay? So once you do determine that you have the right fire extinguisher, everyone's been warned, the fire department's on its way, you think you can attempt to fight the fire, you're going to want to first arm the fire extinguisher, okay, pull the pin out, place the nozzle at the base of the fire, spray it in short bursts with a gentle sweep at the base of the fire. If you're clearly gaining the upper hand, continue until the extinguisher or however many extinguishers you have are gone. If they empty before the fire is out or you can't control the fire, get the heck out of there, okay? And never just leave a fire you put out and unobserved. The reason that is I'm sure all of you have stamped out a pile of rags. Oh, it's out now. And then poof, it lights up again immediately, okay? Once something is lit on fire, you've really got to make sure it's out. That's why fire departments spend a lot of time at the fire, okay? Proper use of a portable fire extinguisher, pull the pin, aim the nozzle at the base of the flame, squeeze the handle, and sweep it from side to side. It says in here right to left. I don't think the fire cares. If you do left to right, that's not going to be the end of the world. The reason you're aiming at the base of the fire is to remove the oxygen supply closest to the fuel. That's where you want to remove oxygen from. All right, we're gonna skip over this self-test because it's largely WHIMIS, and I still do want to teach you something to do with WHIMIS. It's just, it looks like it's gonna, excuse me guys, it looks like it's gonna end up being next week that we do that, okay? So we can skip over this self-test and we're gonna take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're gonna do the next ILM, which is gonna be 101D. Any questions so far? How's everyone doing?
Good.
Pretty good.
Okay, were you able
Really good.
near the end there a bit better when I muted everybody?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that was a lot better.
Okay, so
Still hear that static a bit, but not as bad.
okay, I'll try and get rid of that too a bit. Just make sure everybody you're muting yourself then when you're not talking. I guess it does make a difference for some of the other people participating. So
You can just hold spacebar and I'll unmute you too.
yeah,
If that helps people.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. If you mute yourself and then you want to talk, you just hold spacebar down and then it'll unmute it temporarily, so it doesn't permanently unmute you. Okay.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. By the time we're done here, we're all going to be experts at this program. Hey, I think so.
You bet.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, let's just, take a couple minutes, stretch out, grab a drink, and we're going to go over communication then real quickly. All right.